In episode 2 of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we meet a man named Isaiah Bradley, who was another test subject for a super soldier formula similar to the one that made scrawny Steve Rogers into America's ass. The details at the start of Isaiah's origin story are remarkably similar to Steve's, but the similarities end very quickly. So why did Steve become a legendary hero and leader of the Avengers, while Isaiah spent 3 decades in prison as an unwilling test subject? Let's get some actual context. Sam and Bucky learn of a new breed of super soldiers working under the banner of the Flag Smashers. These young anarchists have somehow managed to obtain a serum that was impossible to replicate perfectly, and when it was copied poorly and took a lot of resources to accomplish. Abraham Erskine, the German scientist who made the super soldier serum, held part of the formula in his mind. So when he was assassinated right after the creation of Captain America, the formula in its most potent and pure form was lost. Steve Rogers was one of a kind. Or so it seemed. We've seen other super soldiers, including Bucky himself and the other Winter Soldiers who died at the hands of Zemo in Civil War. These were created using a latter generation formula concocted by Howard Stark, who was killed by the Winter Soldier while delivering the serums to S.H.I.E.L.D. That batch of serum was taken by Hydra and used to create the super soldier seen in Captain America: Civil War. There's also the Hulk, which was created when Bruce Banner attempted a gamma-modified variation of the serum, unleashing his innermost rage personified as a savage monster instead. In the Incredible Hulk film, Emil Blonsky was given yet another janky serum from General Ross, then later modified by Bruce Banner's blood. This caused him to become an abomination both in name and form. That serum is clearly stated to be a bootleg super soldier formula. The Red Room in Russia, where Black Widows such as Black Widow are trained to be elite assassins, also dabbled in their own version of an enhancement formula. In the comics, Natasha Romanoff does have some enhanced abilities from a serum, and it looks like they may establish this in her upcoming solo film as well. It would make sense as to how she's able to perform some of the crazy stunts she does. The Russian super soldier serum that was given to Black Widows isn't as powerful as the American super soldier serum because... But there are more operatives out there who have taken the Russian version. So if Russia had its own super soldier program, and we know the US was constantly trying to repeat Erskine's success throughout the 20th century, it's entirely reasonable that there would be other test subjects we don't know about. Not only is this reasonable in the MCU, it's supported by real-life events. Isaiah Bradley was introduced in the 2003 miniseries Truth, Red, White, and Black, which told the hidden history of US attempts to make a new super soldier after the original Captain America. In Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Bradley is one of 30 test subjects who were all black men. They were told they'd have a chance to prove their worth by serving their country. Bradley is given the serum, but it's not nearly as pure and has severe side effects down the road. He and other black super soldiers are sent on covert missions, defeat evil scientists, and generally kick a lot of ass, without a word of press or praise. The black super soldiers are not given the accolades afforded to Steve Rogers. In Captain America: The First Avenger, Steve gets tired of the dancing monkey routine performing at USO shows, and when Bucky is taken prisoner by the Nazi scientist Red Skull, Steve leaps into action. Despite being ordered to not go rescue his friend, Steve does it anyway. He steals a government-issued star-spangled shield and costume, a helmet, a gun, a jeep, and spirits away on a civilian aircraft to drop behind enemy lines at a crucial moment in the war effort. When Steve returns successful, he's given a little finger wag and a shrug. Then he's promoted. Disobeying direct orders, stealing government property, going AWOL, and engaging the enemy alone. And Steve Rogers was hailed a hero. A decade or so later, as Steve Rogers chilled in some ice, the black super soldiers were captured behind enemy lines. All but Isaiah Bradley, who stole a crappy shield and a spare Captain America suit and went AWOL to rescue his comrades. Bradley succeeded in bringing his brothers home, as well as another couple dozen POWs. However, Isaiah did all this without permission. When he returned, he was promptly court-martialed and sent to prison.
A couple of the boys get captured on a mission. I heard the brass talking about blowing the POW camp to hell to hide the evidence. But those are my men, my brothers, not evidence. So I bust out of the facility one night, and I brought them boys back. Not that it made a damn bit of difference. It wasn't long before it was only me left. And what did I get for saving their lives? They put my ass in jail for 30 years.
So let's recap. Steve Rogers disobeys orders, steals government property, returns home successfully, and when he gets home, he's promoted and leads the Allies in critical missions to take down the Axis war effort. Isaiah Bradley disobeys orders, steals government property, returns home, and when he is, he's imprisoned. Imprisoned for the exact same thing Steve Rogers did, to the letter. And Isaiah is locked away for decades. That's not even the worst part. Bradley was not only locked in solitary confinement, which is considered by the UN to be literal torture these days, he was subjected to lab tests, blood withdrawal, experiments, and abuse. This is of course fictional, right? And the US government would never engage in that kind of horrific treatment against any citizen. Right? If you agreed with that, maybe you aren't aware of the following real-life historical examples. In 1932, 600 African American men from Macon County, Alabama, were enlisted to partake in a scientific experiment on syphilis. The Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male was conducted by the United States Public Health Service and involved blood tests, x-rays, spinal taps, and autopsies of the subjects. The goal was to, quote-unquote, observe the natural history of untreated syphilis in black populations. But the subjects were unaware of this and were simply told they were receiving treatment for bad blood, when in actuality they received no treatment at all. Even after penicillin was discovered as a safe and reliable cure for syphilis, the majority of the men did not receive any treatment whatsoever. This eventually came out when a whistleblower, Peter Buxton, leaked information about the study to the New York Times. The paper published it on the front page, and soon after, 40 years after the tests had began, the Tuskegee study finally ended. By that time, only 74 of the test subjects were still alive. 128 patients had died of syphilis or its complications. 40 of their wives had been infected, and 19 of their children had acquired congenital syphilis. An advisory panel concluded the Tuskegee study was ethically unjustified. Talk about an understatement, Jesus. The men were never given treatment, and what's more, the government scientists used every method they could to prevent the victims of their cruel study from receiving any treatment from any other sources. Their goal was never to treat the men, but to observe the effects of untreated syphilis over a long period of time. To watch as syphilis ravaged these men's minds and their bodies, as it destroyed their families. And then it was passed down to the next generation. Hundreds of black men lied to, made to suffer intentionally and for decades, causing irreparable generational trauma to satisfy the curiosity of white men. Take a moment, soak that in. Now let's learn about the immortal Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks is not immortal in the way that Thor is immortal, or even the way that Immortal Man is immortal. Ms. Lacks was immortalized after she received treatment in 1951 for abdominal cancer, and her cancerous cells were stolen for academic and medical use. Lacks had gone to Johns Hopkins, the only hospital in the area that even treated black patients, because she felt a knot in her womb. Soon after, Lacks was informed that she had a malignant epidermoid carcinoma of the cervix. During her treatments, 2 samples were taken from Lacks' cervix without her permission or knowledge. One sample was of healthy tissue and the other was cancerous. These samples were given to another physician and cancer researcher at Johns Hopkins. Cells from the cancerous sample eventually became known as the HeLa immortal cell line, a commonly used cell line in biomedical research to this day. While these cells became an integral part of researching cancer and other diseases, it was still done against her consent, without her knowledge. No, Henrietta Lacks' story isn't as horrific or malicious as what was done to the Tuskegee victims, but she is a strong example of white people deciding that their goals outweigh the dignity or agency of black people. When we consider the historical atrocity of slavery in the U.S., the denial of civil rights once slavery ended, the transformation of slavery from whips and chains to cops in private prisons, and the stories of Henrietta Lacks and the Tuskegee victims, the picture being painted in Falcon and the Winter Soldier becomes disturbingly clear. Isaiah Bradley represents the history of America's exploitation of black people. Exploitation in service of whatever white men decide is the greater good at the time. During slavery, it was the greater good to own slaves because they were uncivilized and simple. During Jim Crow, it was the greater good to marginalize African Americans by denying them the right to vote, hold jobs, get an education, or other opportunities readily afforded white people. When the government inflicted deceptive, deadly studies on the men in the Tuskegee experiments, it was for the greater good. When Henrietta Lacks' cells were stolen and used against her will, it was the greater good in the minds of those scientists. The archaic voter suppression laws being pushed in Georgia and other states right now are deceptively portrayed as being for the greater good of democracy. But one group's greater good is often another group's trauma or disenfranchisement. Isaiah mirrors the experiences of many black people in the US, exploited, abused, deceived, and imprisoned, used as scapegoats while their life and resources are drained from them. Isaiah's exact story is a superhero fiction, but it's rooted in very real and very morally fucked up practices. The Tuskegee subjects, Henrietta Lacks, and countless other examples should be remembered as why we have to do better.
I believe we can do better.
It's not enough to not be racist. Those Tuskegee scientists didn't think they were racist. Most racists don't consider themselves racist, because racism on an individual level is a subconscious thing. We have to be anti-racist, which is an active state of mind. It takes mindfulness and, dare I say, actual context. It takes learning from black people's voices themselves. And I don't mean find someone like Candace Owens who's paid to be the conservative token black lady. She makes a lot of money selling the exact same rhetoric used to justify the Tuskegee studies, Jim Crow, and slavery. Like Sam Wilson in the final episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we have to stand in the legacies of both white and black America. We have to acknowledge the harm done to generations and go forward with the resolve to merge these two Americas, to truly unite these United States for the first time in history. Sam Wilson, now known as Captain America, has taken the mantle as a symbol to remind us that we're not separate, and whatever happens to one race affects the other. The last year of protests, the murder of George Floyd, and dozens of other unjust deaths by violent agents of this archaic system, the disproportionate effect the pandemic has had on people of color, it all tells us the same thing the show does. It's time to truly heal the wounds of the past by making the changes necessary to make sure those things never happen again. There are links below for some black creators I think are really awesome and should be checked out. I'll also leave links in the description if you want to learn more about Tuskegee or Henrietta Lacks, as well as more context on Isaiah Bradley and the other super soldiers. Before we wrap this up, I'd like to ask you to consider something. The Hulk, Black Widow, Bucky Barnes, Abomination, all have super soldier serum, or some variation of it, coursing through their veins. The original serum was lost in World War II, and Isaiah Bradley was subjected to decades of tests and blood samples. He would have been tested by Hydra as they were operating within SHIELD at the time. Hydra then sold or gave the samples to various entities like Russia, where the Red Room gave the Black Widows some Molotov cocktail serum. Bucky was also given a version of the serum that was produced using Isaiah's blood. With that in mind, it becomes clear that the white heroes we admire in the present day are only possible thanks to the exploitation, imprisonment, and abuse of African Americans. Men like Isaiah Bradley, who may be fictional but represent countless black people in US history. Just like here in the real world United States, the MCU's success was built on the suffering of black people. If you think that's unfair, let me know in the comments why you disagree. Please be respectful. I don't mean to say we shouldn't enjoy the MCU or that you should be resentful of your heroes. That's not a method for being anti-racist, that's just making it about you. Just keep these real-world parallels in mind. Teach them to others. These stories should open our eyes to injustice. They should prompt us to have these conversations and to ask questions. After all, we ask questions to get answers. And what is an answer if not actual context persevering? Make sure to subscribe, and liking videos is an awesome way to support the channel. If you want to support it even more and get some sweet perks, head over to patreon.com/forcedadversity or become a channel member by clicking join below this video. Hey, here's my lovely patrons now on the screen right here. I don't think that Alex Jones is the Alex Jones, but maybe. That'd be wild, right? Nah, I don't think that's him.